Vipin Makhija right now has no personal life, no social life at all. So, 2025, I've had absolutely no personal or social life. Now,
Okay.
I don't mind that. I've lived that life, um, and I've enjoyed that life thoroughly. I never wanted to build for investors.
Mm.
I wanted to build for the users that I wanted to solve the problem for. I don't want to build an army here. Or, I'd rather have a special ops team, right? A small team that is very functional, very efficient, figure out the why. Why are you doing this, right? And that's a personal question. But there's also the why of the product. Why does a product exist, right? So I think founders have to answer those questions before they are successful.
Okay, welcome to the Solve Fast Labs podcast. I'm Karthik, and today I've got Vipin. We're talking to him from a completely different sector. We've not spoken to anyone from the real estate sector, so it's going to be very insightful to say the least. So, Vipin, I did some basic research, so please feel free to correct if some of what I'm saying is wrong here. So Vipin is spent around 15 years in product leadership, taking companies from early stage all the way to IPO. He's been a mentor at Techstars, which is a startup hub, and other accelerators as well. And then he did something interesting. Interesting in the sense I am a founder myself. He's self-funded his own startup for a year and a half, talking to over 400 agents. So this is something that you call market research done properly. And then he's built a Instagram following of 800 real estate professionals, all before launching publicly. So real estate, I know I'm not familiar with this field, so I'm hoping to learn a lot from Vipin itself. I understand that it's going through a major shakeup right now, especially in the US. Apparently, there has been a NAR settlement that's changed how agents get paid. So commissions are under pressure, and agents who can't generate their own leads and build their own brand, they're going to struggle a lot. So Vipin, welcome to Solve Fast Labs.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Karthik, and hello to everyone that's listening or watching. I do want to quickly correct something. You said 800 agents on our Instagram. It's actually 8,000, but it doesn't matter. I started with zero, so I would have taken 800, but we've managed to go one step further, and we've taken it to almost 8,000 real estate agents following us.
That's amazing. I'm going to look forward to. There's a lot of things that I want to pick as we are going through this podcast. Let's start with my first question. Vipin, you spent 15 years building products for other people. Okay, you've spent time in Credit Suisse, startups that went to IPO. So when was the moment, right? People typically have a moment and then, they say, okay, fine, hey, chuck it, I'm going to do my own thing. So, when did that all happen? Was it like gradually building up, or how did that all happen? And that'll be good to start this whole podcast off.
Yeah, so I've always been in the product space. In fact, I'm wearing a T-shirt right now that says "I build products." And so I've always been obsessed with identifying problems that exist in the real world and then coming up with a solution, typically a digital product, a platform, an enterprise software even that solves that problem. And as you said, the foundation earlier, I started off the journey in a bank, in an investment bank, um, for about 3 years, then moved to a much smaller fintech company, financial data company, I should say, also in New York City for about 10 years. So I had spent more than a decade in in companies that were well established. Even though we went from like a 40,000, 50,000 person bank to when I started at IHS Market back in the day, about 800 people. So I'd already sensed the change in the energy and the change in the way people operate, right? From a large bank, everything is, the roadmap is in front of you for the next 2 years, and you're planning, to a company that was mid-sized, private company at that time, right? Trying to figure out how it can do better than some of the established companies. So the energy was higher. We were doing a lot more functions at the same time, right? So everybody was wearing multiple hats, and I had a great ride. And when I left IHS Market, I think it had already grown to 15,000 people and had gone through an IPO already. And then, I was starting to kind of go through that familiar sort of feeling, right, of a large company moving a little bit more slowly than what market was when I first started. And I realized that I was kind of like itching to go back to an even smaller company now. And so I think that was kind of like that moment where I started thinking, okay, I need to think new ideas. I need to go back to smaller companies, find out new problems that I could solve for. And at that time, there was a lot of, at IHS Market, there was a lot of focus from the executive leadership on sort of innovation. So in some ways, I felt that that was going to be maybe the next chapter. But then COVID happened, and and then people had, other things on their mind. So I knew at this point that potentially creating or or participating in something called an innovation hub in a larger company was not on top of people's minds. So for me, that was a perfect sort of milestone, but also perfect timing in some ways to kind of start exploring smaller companies, startups, my own ideas. And I started advising a couple of startups on the product strategy side of things. Worked as a chief product officer for a mobile tech company for a year and a half. But at the back of my mind, I'd already done some research on a problem that I felt needed solving. So then I was like, okay, I gotta pull the trigger and become a founder, a first-time founder at that time. And that was kind of the start of my journey as a startup founder.
That's nice. It's always interesting. Before I founded my startup, GameBench, which is also into the mobile performance space, we've I had the same sort of issues going. The energy and the aspects that you talk about, where people wear different hats, well, that's very palpable in a small company. If there is stuff to get done, it needs to get done, right? So it's not
Yep.
someone has to do it, and it's really good, when everybody does everything, so to say. So on the back of that, I mean, you mentioned that initially you said, okay, enterprise SaaS, digital products. You mentioned that you'd love building. You're looking for a problem, and then how can you solve using a digital solution, right? So what prompted you? I'm not familiar with what IHS Market do, and you mentioned that you loved the phase where it went from 800 to whatever to IPO. But amongst all this, while you were itching and you were, chief product officer, how did you choose the problem? And you could have chosen anything. How did real estate come into the radar?
Yeah. So I was actually mentoring a few people around the world on how to think of new product ideas and how to innovate in really any industry. And I've written a few blogs on how to fast read an industry, and really, if you have the right passion and if you have the right obsession with
Hmm.
customer success and understanding problems, then it's truly possible to innovate in most industries. But this one actually started more closer, I would say, to home. My brother-in-law in New Jersey had just started his journey as a real estate agent after many years doing, corporate life as well.
Yeah.
And so I'd seen some of the struggles that he went through early on in terms of growing his brand, developing his business pipeline, and really finding a foundation for himself in this new industry that he hadn't worked with. Now, we can all sort of associate with real estate. We've rented, we go through buying and selling a couple of times in our lifetimes. We know people who've done this. So it's something we can truly like connect with. I think most people, but I've seen these problems very closely at home essentially. And I'm like, okay, so if he's going through this, I wonder if other agents are facing similar issues, are going through similar questions, right? It could be newer agents, it could be more established ones, but I'd seen that there was a potential to find a problem, right? At this point, I'm not thinking a solution. I'm thinking, is there a real problem that exists? And what is the extent of this problem, right? I was focused obviously in the US, but in the last year, we've also explored a couple of other countries and we'll probably get to it. But that's kind of how it started. And just focus on real estate because you did mention that this is maybe not an industry that you've had podcast guests. Now, it seems like a very sort of transactional, from a distance, it feels like a transactional, space. You buy, you sell. But if you think about this, it might even be the biggest industry, which has the highest number of sort of high stake emotional moments, right? You're getting married, you have your first kid coming up, getting divorced in some cases, you're letting go of the house that you grew up in, you're getting promoted, you're moving for work. So most of these decisions are extremely emotional for people involved. And so on both fronts, it checked off a few things that appealed to me, right? Is there a problem from a small business or real estate agent point of view, right? That I could potentially create a product for? And how are these buyers and sellers working with real estate agents, right? In such an emotional sort of high stake, maybe the biggest financial decision of their life, how do they cooperate with real estate agents? So for me, these two players, these two humans in this equation, I went out and started speaking with, tens of agents and buyers and sellers, and some themes started to emerge. So that was kind of how I got started.
See, it's interesting. I like the fact that you mentioned the emotional angle. That is not something that I've thought about, but yes, it's probably the biggest, if not the biggest, investment that you make in any country, right? So I'm in the UK. We are based in the UK, and it's still property. Getting on the property ladder is a massive thing everywhere, right? So I can understand, and if there's a problem that's there to solve, as I think like what you said, and I also like the other fact that you mentioned there, Vipin, which is I wasn't building a solution. I'm not thinking about solution. Now, coming from an engineering background that hits a chord, you know, usually founders they jump onto the solution, and you don't want to be doing that. And it's great to know that you were hunting for the problem and you were validating the problem there, which is amazing. I mean, that is something, a lesson to learn for people who are aspiring to do a startup. And for the first startup that you've started, that's really 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 cool. But so let's go on to the bootstrapping part, because that is something that is fascinating as well for me. So in my own startup, we relied on funding, and most companies want some form of, angel investment, seed investments to get their company going. You self-funded for a year and a half. That's a deliberate choice, right? So what was the thinking behind bootstrapping? Did you have any bad moments? Did you hear any stories with some of your friends, with founders and investors tussle, or what was the reason? Or did you want more control? What can you walk us through your thinking behind the self-funding?
So like all founders, I went through a journey, right, of sort of discovery, right? What I love doing, what I don't love doing, right? Which are
Mm.
the things that I'm amazing at, which are the things I suck at, right? Which are the things I could potentially get better at, even though I suck at them right now. So I went through a bit of that discovery early on, but I'm also wired, I think, to experience things first myself instead of going through a template that is out there. And that template, especially when it comes to fundraising, seems quite sexy from a distance, right? I raised Series A, Series B, Series C, whatnot. And, generally you hear about companies raising more. But I'm not wired like that, I think. And that's what I realized. That's what I discovered. I don't want to build for investors. I never wanted to build for investors.
Mm.
I wanted to build for the users that I wanted to solve the problem for. And I realized at the first stage, I didn't need external capital, right? I wanted to focus on determining the problem market fit. Now I'd done well in life, so I didn't have to, you know, let's say, eat ramen as I was building the company in the early days. So I had my that's I guess luxury of like starting late because you've already sort of saved enough money, right? If you're starting right out of college, you probably don't have enough savings, right? So it makes more sense to go after external capital. That was not the case with me. So I'd spent not 2 decades. I'd spent a decade and a half almost in corporate life, and I'd done well. So I didn't have the immediate need to go rush and raise capital. So I felt comfortable, but I also felt comfortable in the signals that I was getting from the market, which was, almost like 75, 80% of agents that I spoke to, said, "Yep, we want to do better." I feel I feel lost sometimes, right? How do I grow my business? There's a lot of unpredictability. In fact, I didn't find one real estate agent of the hundreds that I spoke to directly or interviewed or surveyed or focus groups who said, "Yep, I'm happy with the state of my business." Everybody said, "Yep, I would love to be more consistent in creating a pipeline. I would love to sell more. I would love to meet more people." So I'm like, okay, I'm onto something here, right? I don't need to distract myself and start pitching to investors. And I'm also a mentor at accelerators. So I've seen this shiny object of fundraising sometimes very early when, you know, people don't really have to. So,
Yeah.
so for me, it was, both a case of I didn't need to because I had savings I could deploy,
Yeah.
but I also at the same time was getting enough signals from the market that I just wanted to continue to focus on mining them and understanding them and not get pulled into, the glamorous, I should say, the glamorous world of fundraising, because in the end, I love building products and I wanted to do what I could do creatively, so I didn't need to. Now that said, obviously, I'm not foolish to believe that you could scale while bootstrapping at the same level as you could maybe if you were raising. So it's something I want to look into in 2026. It's something that we're already preparing for. I also have a co-founder, which we'll get into at some point. He's on board starting this year. So I think 2026 for us is going to be focused on also creating the right fundraising strategy to help us scale. We've established enough groundwork, but I think to help scale, we think injecting external capital could boost and could help us cut down maybe go-to-market timelines. But I do believe that there's value in speaking to investors, not just for the money. And that's why I did actually pitch and spoke to a few investors, and I got some good feedback, some helpful, some critical feedback as well, which I thought was fantastic. Right? I mean, this is what they do all the time. So I didn't go to them for money. I did go to investors to kind of socialize the idea, right? The approach. And I was surprised by, some of the very savvy investors who were able to kind of like decode very quickly and give me some amazing feedback, which I went back to the drawing board. I'm like, okay, commercially, I could be thinking a little bit differently. So, I felt like I was in some ways fortunate, and in some ways it was by design that I did speak with investors. I built some relationships, but I didn't need the money at that time.
That's a very interesting take. There's few things that I would love to go a little bit deeper, maybe not spend a lot of time. One is just from a selfish perspective and for other founders who are probably looking to establish. You mentioned that you interviewed 400 people, right? So focus groups, talking to people. How did you go about doing that? Because that is quite a significant number of people to interview and to collect that, right? So that's one question. And then the second question, I like the fact that you mentioned that you used investors as sounding boards to actually validate what you're thinking from a business model, from your proposition, from your whole concept, right? That is amazing. And can you talk a little bit more about did that come about organically, or did you actually reach out to investors just for validating your concept, right?
Right.
And the third thing, okay, leave the last thing. I know you mentioned that you've done well, and what part of your career kind of gave you the tools, so to say, the before, right? Before you started Cast or before you got into it, was it your chief product officer, or was when you're building IHS Market? What equipped you with some of the tools that you could transfer as a solo founder, right? So if you can cover those aspects in brief, that'll be good.
Okay, cool. So let's start with the first one, which was market
Yeah,
research, right?
yeah,
Which is something that is very dear to my heart almost, right? Because you hear so much when you speak to people, and I apply this in personal life as much as I can, right?
mm, mm,
You're going to hear a lot from people directly, but there's going to be things that they're not saying but they kind of want to say, right? So you really have to be passionate, I think, about listening to people. And you really have to go into those meetings or surveys or interviews with like a very open mind, right? So just something I naturally like doing. And in fact, if I didn't have to run a bootstrap startup tackling 7 different things and testing the app at 4 in the morning, I would still be talking to real estate agents about problems, not even solutions. Although we're getting to a stage where I'm starting to talk to them about the product we're building, and we can get into that as well maybe later in the podcast. But you have to really find this exercise exciting. Otherwise, you cannot do a good job at it. But obviously, to scale and to speak with tens of these agents, you have to figure out strategies and you have to figure out, let's say, creative ways. So, other than the regular hustle, which is picking up the phone and saying, "Hey, would you introduce me to a real estate agent? I'm doing a quick feedback." I did a bunch of that. There's some interesting ways you could use, right? So you could run an ad and attach some sort of a gift, if you will, to that ad and ask people to fill out the survey. Um, I did that. I obviously spoke to people one to one, and I was also mentoring a few people around the world on sort of product innovation.
Mhm.
And I'm like, hey, why don't we pick up this new industry? And then everybody goes out and speaks to agents, right? So I set sort of some guardrails. Here's what we got to cover. This is how we should approach market research. And it's not just like, okay, tell me what you want, because people don't know what they want, right? People can tell you what they're suffering from, but they can't exactly tell you what the solution will be because the solution does not exist, hopefully, at that time. And that's where you come in. So one, you just hustle and grind and you find places where real estate agents operate. You find other people who are willing to do this. We just hired 4 interns during summer to go out and do the exact same research in a different country. You run surveys, but you can also recruit. And I've done this for my previous company as well. You can recruit companies that will help you distribute your quantitative surveys to the type of people that you want to reach. So I did that as well. And a combination of that plus like just social media listening. Go join Facebook groups that are popular with real estate agents. They will tell you so much. Go listen to Reddit groups, right? And subscribe to them and see what real estate agents are talking about. So I combine all of that into the number 400. I didn't call 400 agents on the phone
Yeah.
personally, individually, but a combination of research, focus groups, interviews, hiring interns, scaling it that way, and then supplementing that with some quantitative surveys. So all of that together was sort of the fuel for that market research exercise. So that was the first part of your question. The second part, I think, was around um,
Funding and
fundraising.
VCs, yeah, and how you thought about going to them more from a different standpoint.
Yeah. So obviously, like most founders, like I'm also not just curious, but I know they play a role. I know they play an important role in the ecosystem. It's just not the most important role for me at that stage.
Hmm.
That said, I love building relationships in general with people. And I never approached any meeting with like, okay, give me money. I mean, I didn't need the money at that time, but if somebody were to write me a check, I would take it at that time. But that wasn't my intention. So my intention was really like, again, going to events, especially in New York City, where I know VCs are going to be around, or somebody who's wanting to be an investor is going to be around, and maybe he can introduce me or she can introduce me to somebody, and just go through your personal network. And I hustled my way on stage at 5 events, 6 events, I would say, last year at New York Tech Week, somehow through existing relationships or just like figuring out who's the host and like shooting them a quick personal note. Hey, can I speak? Can I pitch at your event? And so I was able to do that. I was able to do one to one with investors, and I used all of that, I think, to kind of give me some more insights into how I should potentially be thinking about commercializing it when the time is right. So yeah, so I think you'll probably see a trend. For me, it's really about like listening to what people have to say, but you have to figure out a way to get in front of those people. So that's a fundraising part. And then third one, I think you talked about where and when do I feel I was equipped with the tools.
Correct.
And that I
What
think
helped? Yeah.
that's a little bit of, I think, like all the jobs and maybe advisory roles that I've had, because I do feel like for a company, for a business, for a startup or large enterprise to be successful, you got to have people that are working in the business, and then you need to also have people that are working on the business, right? So, and I played both roles in some ways. But let's say 10 years at IHS Market, like hiring teams, working in in areas, in sort of in divisions and in sections of the company where there's uncertainty, right? What do we want to build, right? There's clients waiting to give you money, but like you got to figure out the best product. Working with remote teams, that's happened to me like literally every single job or role I've held. So I think collectively, all of that, working very closely with like CTOs and technology folks, and just figuring out ways to take ideas, work with them to develop something that's um, that's going to solve the original problem. So I think over time, this has been an accumulation of skill sets, of tools, and of approaches, I should say, that I feel like I felt comfortable embarking on this journey as a solo founder at that time. But I've learned so much more after that, which maybe we can get into at some point today.
So now you mentioned that, the solo founder, and you mentioned that you've been joined by a co-founder. I think now is a good time to ask about that. When did that transition happen? When did you realize, or when did it dawn on you that I don't want to be doing this alone? Or rather, you want, like early on in the podcast, you mentioned, hey, you know what you're good at and what you suck at, which is
Yep.
great. I mean, most people don't know that, right? So was one of that that led you to say, okay, fine, I need a different perspective. Yeah, like, can you talk a little bit more about the co-founder, your team, and before we move on to the industry itself and the problem you're solving?
Yeah. So as I said earlier, I mean, I want to go through lived experiences as much as possible. And I had an idea. I had enough funds to hire a team, a small team to kind of develop the idea and test it out. So I thought I could proceed without a co-founder at the first stage, which I did. And to some degree of success, because I was able to build an MVP and get it out there, get some feedback from early users or leads or early real estate agents or adopters, whatever you want to call them. And then I'm starting to move to the next stage, like I said earlier, getting some feedback from industry people, from investors. And one of the questions everybody kept asking was, do you have a co-founder? Right? How are you going to do this on your own? And I'm starting to think, why is everyone asking me this? Right? Because I didn't feel at that time that I couldn't do it. And maybe I was too stubborn at that time to accept that you need a partner at some point. And so I said, no, I've got the skills, and I've got a team, and I've developed teams in the past, and I feel like I can. When the time is right, we'll figure out the relationship. And all that was good for the first year and a half. And then I'm like, okay, I am feeling burnt out, right? And I feel that and my team was the team I'd hired of developers and a couple of data scientists. They were pretty good. But at the same time, they didn't have that much skin in the game. They were salaried employees. And I'd also sort of expanded my own product vision. So at that point, I'm starting to think, okay, I need to figure out a way to not feel burnt out, right? Upskill the team that I have, but also set up the company for a longer term with this expanded product vision. And it was a bit of a natural aha moment. I'm like, okay, I can potentially start to now think about that co-founder role that everybody asks me. But I knew obviously at that time that I was not going to find a co-founder just for the purpose of showing a face to investors. And I know so many founders who do this. And the stats are also like, stacked against you in some ways, because most companies, early stage companies with first time founders, fail because of the co-founder relationship not working out. So I wanted to make sure that I did the right thing when it felt right, and that
Hmm.
I got in touch with a couple of folks that I had long term relationships with. I was looking for essentially a CTO, head of technology kind of co-founder, so I could focus on the product and sort of maybe marketing side of things. So I started speaking with some people that I had good relationships with, who were sort of seasoned leaders in the technology space, and I went through a couple of like deeper dives. One, either they didn't quite see the same vision, or they had other things going on, or I didn't feel the same amount of passion, or maybe they were located in a different company or country even. And then sort of stars had to align, obviously, for me to kind of pull that trigger on this big decision. So I ended up meeting my co-founder in India. We met for, a beer, just generally catching up. I shared what I was building, and he expressed some interest in, exploring it further. We went out actually and we did some market research ourselves. And he decided to also like roll up his sleeves and say, listen, you know, let's do this. He had spent a couple of decades also in corporate life and also was ready to take a bit more risk, if you will, right? And I mean, we all know like AI is going to change the world if it isn't already changed. And you want to at some point you want to also build maybe a legacy of your own, selfishly speaking. So I think a lot of those aligned at the right time, and we spent a few months sort of negotiating what the partnership would look like. And I think eventually we landed on what felt like a win-win situation. And here we are. It's been 6 months. So far, so good. And looking forward to continuing that relationship, of course. But also, I'm speaking with one or two other people who bring a different skill set. I don't know if that's going to be a co-founder relationship, but certainly like some sort of partnership.
Yeah.
Um, so one step at a time. And I was actually just speaking with somebody last week who was seeking my advice almost on like going about the co-founder recruitment, if you will. And I said, um, that first you have to feel right about it, right? And you got to have, some trust in your co-founder. You're not going to hash out everything perfectly in the terms. So as a founder, you've got to see, okay, can I trust this person enough, right? And we'll figure out the rest of the way.
Sounds good. Sounds good. And it's good to know, you've landed on the co-founder and hope things work out for you guys. And, the CTO co-founder is usually the way people get in or get roped in, I guess. But, hopefully they can buy into the vision and the passion that you clearly seem to have there, Vipin. So best of luck for that. So let's move on a little bit more quicker onto your industry problem now. So uh, for somebody like me, I had to do a little bit of research as to what was broken in the system. I might not have understood the whole thing properly. So can you explain to us a little bit, and for the people who are going to listen into this podcast, what is broken, right? So what's fundamentally broken about the way agents or realtors operate
Yep.
today?
Okay. So I would almost say like it's a trifecta of problems that agents are facing, right? One is there's a general sort of lack of trust in the function, in the role itself, right? Buyers and sellers and investors who go through real estate agents are asking like, okay, how much value are you really adding, right? So that's a big one, right? And that's always been the case actually, right? But how do you address this now? That's a challenge for realtors, but also for companies like real estate brokerages who employ like 1.5 million plus real estate agents in the US, right? So it's not a small market at all. But they still have to prove the value that they bring, and basically that trust I think is lacking a little bit. So that's one. On the technology side, based on the tens of interviews that I did, every agent essentially is juggling a whole bunch of tools. They're solopreneurs, typically small businesses, right? Maybe they work in small teams. Now they have the mothership, which is kind of the real estate brokerage, but in the end, the real estate agents are sort of the masters of their own destiny. So they have to figure out how to get buyers, how to get sellers, how to show up on social media, how to do email marketing, how to go to networking events, how to show up as somebody who's a hyper local expert in that neighborhood. And for that, they use a whole bunch of tools from marketing to CRM tools to social media, email marketing, what have you, right? But let's face it, nobody in the world can handle all these tools, and especially not if you're like out and about, like showing houses, trying to build relationships. As a solopreneur, it's almost impossible, right? So they're juggling all these tools, and now they're hit with this other monster called AI. And everyone's saying, do we really need agents in this world of AI? So that's an existential kind of question that real estate agents and brokerages are currently asking. Is AI going to replace us? Is AI going to replace me? Right? So that's the trifecta of problems. There's sort of that trust, there's the existing tool set, but there's also like, okay, even if I solve those two problems, how the hell do I solve for like, I don't know what AI is going to do to me? right? Or to the function in general. So those are the three things that I would say agents are currently grappling and struggling with, and what's kind of like broken in their
Yeah.
role, but also in the industry at large.
I see. And a brief reading, just following on that, on what is broken or not broken, but I read a little bit about this NAR settlement, the National Association of Realtors, if I'm not wrong. So apparently that changed everything, for people who don't follow real estate closely, especially in the US. I'm not based in the US. What happened before and after? And I want you to address one more question following. So how does that settlement change the urgency for an agent to implement, things like what you guys are doing, right? So
Yeah.
what is, yeah, can you talk about both of them, please?
So let's explain what that means in very simple terms,
Yeah.
and then we'll talk about like how Cast can address some of that, or if it can, right? I mean, we're not trying to address every single problem that agents are going to face. We're hopefully creating a smarter workforce, but um, some problems are still to be solved, right? Longer
Mhm.
term from an industry perspective as well. But generally speaking, in the US, you have two sides of the equation. There's a buyer side, there's a seller, right? And I'm going to give you the most common occurrence, right? So there's a real estate agent that works with the buyer, and there's another real estate agent that works with the seller,
Yeah.
pays the commission, right? Let's say 6%. That can be, a little bit up and down depending on the county, depending on the state, but let's just say 6% commission on the transaction price is paid by the seller, and that 6% is then divided in everybody in the buyer side and the seller side. So buyer doesn't pay commission, and then seller pays 6%. So the whole idea is, okay, we have to prove the value of the buyer agent, basically, right? What is the buyer agent doing? Is the buyer agent simply taking the person to show them the home? Like, what are they doing? Like, you have to prove the value. But typically, the way the commissions were structured was like it was kind of like just there, like everybody accepted it, right? So now people are challenging. They're like, no, I want to be able to negotiate how much I pay my buyer agent, right?
Mhm.
From a seller agent perspective, it makes a little bit more sense. I guess that's how I look at the whole thing, right? And you ask 10 people, they'll give you a different perspective, right?
Yeah.
From somebody who's not a real estate agent himself, but is embedded in the industry, what I see is like buyer agents need to show the value that they bring to the table. And I'm all for it, right? In fact, the first thing I said was like there's lack of trust in the industry.
Hmm.
This I think is kind of like a um, the settlement is actually pointing a little bit towards that. And how do you address that lack of trust, right? So for me, from a product perspective, this is basically saying, okay, agents must prove their value, right? And then buyers, I think correctly so, should have the ability to negotiate how much they pay the buyer agent, right? So from a neutral point of view, if I can be neutral here, I don't mind this at all, right? So that's kind of like what the settlement does, right? Now, it's not like set in stone that you'll get the 3%, and that 3% also gets divided, let's say, in brokerage and the agent, and if there's a team lead, et cetera. But generally speaking, you know, you must prove your value, and you need to give the party that you're working with the ability to negotiate the the commission that you get. So commissions are shrinking in some ways, or at least there's pressure, right? So that's kind of the NAR settlement. So it's an important sort of milestone, I would say, in the journey of this entire industry.
Hmm.
But at the same time, I look at numbers, and the numbers haven't changed that much, right? Like I would say, almost 90% of transactions continue to have both buyer agents, seller agents, right? Maybe this year the numbers have shifted a little bit. We'll have to see when the final numbers come up. Maybe next year. I'd be interested in that as well. But the reality is, like I said earlier, it's a very sort of human, emotional transaction for most people, especially buyers, right? Most first time buyers, they don't have that much money saved, they're getting married, first kid on the way and whatnot. So they want to work with a a trusted advisor, right? Not just sort of a transactional intermediary. And that's how I feel agents should operate in general. Like, I would not feel comfortable if I were the agent to simply sell, 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 right? If I'm buying, I want to work with an agent who understands me, gets me, right? Understands my needs in fact, understand my needs better than I understand my needs, right?
Yeah,
So I feel there's an opportunity here. Now, obviously, I'm a little bit biased because I'm building in the space, but I feel like there's definitely an innovation opportunity to create an industry function, but also like products and platforms that could help real estate agents do better at anticipating the needs and then offering them an experience that they feel, yeah, okay, I want to pay this guy 3% because he's earned it, right? So that's kind of where I feel like the industry is going.
I see. That's a really good summary for somebody like me, based first of all based in the UK and trying to understand this dynamic between the buyer agent and the seller agent. It's very interesting, and I have to say that 6% is a lot. I mean, typically in the UK, I think the total commission that we pay is something less than 1%, or maybe a little bit more than 1%. There are some other fees, so it's shocking. That number itself is shocking, but I guess different markets have different dynamics. So let's move on into building Cast itself. So I've got a few different questions for you, right? So you've got the first, let's get the simple pitch, the elevator pitch, right? So someone's hearing about Cast for the first time, right? 30 seconds, what is it?
So I'm going to assume you're a real estate agent, right? Because the pitch is different depending on like who you're talking to. But if you're
Yeah,
a real
go on.
estate agent, the answer is quite simple, right? It's a solution. It's a mobile AI sidekick that's going to help you spot and identify leads, that's buyers and sellers, ahead of your competition. And it's going to help you follow up with them in a personalized way.
Perfect, perfect. That's really simple then. I mean, and it is your market, so I wouldn't expect you to pitch to someone else at the moment, at least. Okay.
But there's an important factor here because we're also now starting to develop a solution for the companies, the brokerages.
I see.
The pitch for brokerages is a little bit different. Yes, they all want the agents to also do better, right? But the companies are also now trying to, this is the AI part that I'm also like not just fascinated but very passionate about as well. They're failing to roll out AI across their organizations, right? They don't have a playbook. It's an industry which is typically a lags, which typically lags in terms of adopting new technology, new innovation. So for them, it's a slightly different evolved problem. Their problem is how do you recruit more and more agents, right, in your company, and how do you make sure you retain them? The churn is, how do you keep the churn low? So for them, it's really the pitch for them is, and this is something we're still building, so the pitch might evolve as well, right? But it's
Mhm.
really an enablement solution for you to roll out AI across your workforce and upskill your agents.
I see. I see. That's so basically you're helping them adopt the Gen AI transition that we're all seeing in some fashion, right?
Yes,
Especially the brokerages.
and actually a combination of Gen AI and conventional AI. So I feel like most people, I think when they think AI, they think like chat GPTs and layers and all of that. But let's not forget AI also is like the machine learning, the non-sexy part of it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so what we're trying to develop for the brokerages and even for the agents is sort of almost like a combination of the conventional, but also the Gen AI side of things.
I see. Okay. So again, a couple of questions together. So as every startup, you as you build it out or when you start out, you're trying to address one problem, right? So first MVP or however, the first problem that you're trying to solve. What was yours? Second, you also mentioned the fact that you were a solo founder for a bit. You're bootstrapped. You can't really go on building everything, right? So what did you choose not to build in the early days?
Okay, so let me answer the second one first because
Okay,
that's
go on.
that's a question I ask on a daily basis, even today, right? I mean, in the end, regardless of whether you're a massive organization or a small startup, your success in terms of how innovative you are is going to depend on where are you deploying your capital. Whatever capital we're talking about, it could be $1 billion or it could be a bootstrap company talking tens of thousands of dollars or even less sometimes, right? So you have to figure out a way to determine what to invest in and what not to invest in, right? And as a startup, you cannot hide. In a big company, in a large company, you can keep working on a project for 12 months. You can keep getting your salary, and then 12 months later, something changes, you're acquired by somebody else, right? Manager changes, executive leadership changes, and then boom, you work on something else. So in startups, especially as founders, you cannot hide. So you have to ask that question on a daily basis. Now, one thing that I've realized is these folks, these real estate agents, right? The hero of of our story, right? They're already juggling 6, 7 different tools, right?
Mm,
And with AI, they're exploring like 10 more AI tools now. So if I throw another tool in the mix and say, oh, my tool is better than other tools, it's not going to work. I mean, it could work depending on how I say it, right? But if I can't even stand behind like why they should do this tool along with 5 other tools, or ask them to stop using one of those tools and like shift to this. So that's what I'm trying to, that's the lens I'm using to filter out what's not to build. So in short, it's really, I don't want them to say goodbye to existing tools, although that's certainly my North Star. I want them to use one platform for, yeah, and not 7, 8 different tools. But if I approach them saying, okay, throw away everything and then shift to this, it's not going to work. So one thing that I look for is how do I not build an additional learning curve for them, right? How do I do something in such a way that it integrates into the existing workflow? Let them adopt this, let them start using it, and then I'll figure out a way to take them to the next step of the journey, which is, okay, now you can switch off these 2 different tools because we're already doing this for you in a much better fashion. So that's what I look at, right? I don't want to increase the work for them. Anytime I feel like they're going to struggle using this or they're going to struggle with another workflow, I say, let's not build this. Let's build this in a way that integrates into the existing. Let's not make it a hard sort of requirement for them, right? To switch from an existing technology platform to another one. Let's add this, and then over time we'll replace the rest.
makes sense. All right. So on following on from your, what you built and not built and how you choose, when, this is more of a question after the ton of market research that you've done, what are the signs that you've got or moments, let's say in the last year, this year, that made you feel, okay, I'm onto something here?
Okay, so I actually literally made a post about this on LinkedIn, I think last week or the week prior to that, right? So we just announced our first sort of commercial beta product, end of October. So we're still very early in terms of like adoption and going to market, but we're running a few pilots. So one of the agents who's been sort of an early adopter and supporter, and now obviously using the upgraded version of the app, during the course of our meeting a week and a half ago, mentioned that he's using another product for a particular sort of functionality, sort of sending direct mail,
Mm-hmm.
and then he doesn't want to use them anymore. He wants to switch to Cast, right? So now he's paying a lot of money to that competitor, and we're not a brand that is as well known as them, but still the fact that he's used Cast for a while, he wants to switch over, he wants to work with us to find a route so he can switch over from those guys. For me, it was a big sort of victory, even though it was a small statement, but it was a big victory. So, so for me, I think that was pretty good. And also, like somebody recently mentioned that they showed it to another agent and the other agent was like, wow, this is insane. Like, this is such a simple thing, but done in like a very interesting way. So they referred another agent in a different state. Obviously, they don't want to compete with the agents in the same um, in the same zip code. So
Yeah.
a referral, I feel like, is always the best way to figure out if agents find it of value. So those two, I think, early signals, not just about features, but more about like the trust that they're putting already in the early product that we have. I think were two positive signals for me.
That's good. That's good. That's always great when you've got validation like that. This referral is like what you said. It's probably the best way. When somebody loves it so much and they can't stop talking about it and they talk to other people, that's amazing. All right, let's move on to our next stage there, Vipin. So little bit this stage will focus more on early stage companies. What are the realities? Let's talk a little bit more about, you mentioned this in passing a little bit about burnout, right? So you were a solo founder. Can you talk a little bit about what it meant for you from the emotional and mental side? You didn't have a co-founder back then. Was it too much to take? How did you cope with it? Or because you loved it, you didn't see it as burden?
I mean, all of this actually, like I said, you're so passionate and you're sort of a bit stubborn as well at times, and you have to be crazy as a startup founder, right? It's not for the faint-hearted. So you keep pushing through and you realize, listen, you even if you could do this on your own, you couldn't scale it, right? Or you couldn't grow it in different directions. So you just have to acknowledge that. So I think the burnout, the ability to sort of let go a little bit, I think was a big revelation as well, right? I don't have to make all the decisions myself, and let's bring in more trusted people. But I still believe that I don't want to build an army here. Or, I'd rather have a special ops team, right? A small team that is very functional, very efficient. But you have to get to that realization, I think, organically, or at least for me, that's how it works. Um, and I also realized that, you have to be creative. I like I said, I didn't raise. Now I had my own funds. My co-founder also invested in the company. But we're keeping the burn rate still quite low. So we don't have to think like, oh, we're going to run out of money. We can put more money in, but at the same time, I think we're now developing a commercial beta product. So hopefully, we can boost um, through selling more. But those are the things like from emotional perspective, you have to realize you can't do it all. You have to let go a little bit, and you just have to kind of get to a stage where you believe it enough to say, okay, to get it to the next stage, I need a stronger, fuller team.
Makes sense. Yeah. In our case, we were always lucky to have two people, and we grew it from there. But we had funding as well. So most companies are different. So I can understand yours is probably unique. So let's move on to your daily operations from there, Vipin. So what does your day look like? I know it's late for you there, and you must be working long hours. What is it? What is it? Can you tell us what Vipin Makhija does from day Monday to Friday? Roughly, how much time is spent on what?
Vipin Makhija, Monday to Sunday, I should say, not Monday to Friday. Vipin Makhija right now has no personal life, no social life at all. So 2025, I've had absolutely no personal or social life. Now,
Okay,
I don't mind that. I've lived that life, um, and I've enjoyed that life thoroughly. I still have it in me, I think, to be as social as I want to. But I made a conscious decision to cut down on the going out part, right? Even the friends part, right? But I was also sort of fortunate in some ways to be able to get some time with my family, and spend some time with them. So I get that sort of outlet just by like being around my family, my parents a little bit more. But yes, so going back to like operationally, I think it's a little bit of everything, right? Until I would say last month, it was more around building the app, testing a feature, releasing it, um, and maybe showing it, demoing it, etc. Now I think now that we have a stable commercial beta, I'm starting to switch a little bit more towards um, just going through my list of people and like finding potential partners, alliances, and just getting the word out. A podcast like this, for example, right? So now, my focus is on doing whatever I can to get in front of as many people as I can and socialize, if not personally, at least for Kast, right? So get Kast in front of as many folks as I can, potential partners. But at the same time, we spoke about AI a little bit. My focus is now also turning a little bit more towards like building some quick experiments myself instead of waiting for developers to do that. So I am rolling up my sleeves a little bit more instead of just product strategy and innovation and testing and like, pitches and decks. I'm also like building some small AI based experiments, right? End to end. So that's kind of where I'm also going in 2026 myself, right? Building some quick product experiments instead of writing it down as a requirement, building a quick working end-to-end prototype, sharing it with the development team. That's going to be a big part of what I do in 2026, but also like finding partners. And, we've put a big product, first version of the product, I should say, on the shelf. Now my focus is shifting towards getting it off the shelf.
I see. Oh yeah, like moving on, I guess. Moved from as you said, you moved from the building a product to using AI to do the actual product definition, or a product requirement. That's really powerful, because nowadays you can quickly develop either UI mock-ups or actually small working products, right? So I've done that myself as well, and I find that really, really useful. So following on a little bit, let's say you've got, this is the magic one question, which is very interesting for different people. I get different answers. I'm very, very curious to see what your answer is going to be, Vipin. Yeah. So let's say you've got a magic wand of unlimited money, unlimited resources, right? What is the one problem that you're going to solve with that? You can only choose one.
I'm assuming we want to focus on Kast, or we want to
Yeah.
we're
Cast, yeah.
expanding this to the rest of the humanity and world.
You can, but we're not. Let's stay with Cast for now. And if you have, let's say that you've been given this magic wand and you want to solve the biggest bottleneck in Cast. What would that be?
Right. Okay. So as I mentioned a couple of times earlier, I think in the end, it's really a matter of like how quickly you can deploy your capital to the right things, right?
Mm,
And both in terms of building, I mean, I've mapped out a 2 to 5 year vision in my head.
mm,
And it would be amazing to bring together 4 to 5 superstars, right? AI builders, product folks, real estate experts, etc. Expand the team basically and sort of execute on that 2 year vision, 5 year vision, and just accelerate the build, right? And so that's the one thing I would do first, right? Which is I believe in the vision we've set out.
mm.
We can do this slow and steady. At some point, we'll accelerate, yes. But if I had all the money in the world, I would probably accelerate on that vision, um, on the build side. So we can go out and we can meet with the biggest brokerages out there quickly instead of sort of waiting 2 to 3 years to kind of slowly build those signals, right? So
Yeah,
capital gets you to a stage where you can exhibit business signals much quicker. And if I had unlimited capital, that's what I would do.
that's interesting. My answer for us for for a different reason is if I had unlimited capital, I would just spend on ads, Google ads and Facebook ads, or not Facebook ads, to get more customers, right? So I guess different companies are in different phases. I can see where you are coming from. You're in the build phase, so I guess channeling more of the capital towards that makes sense at this point, I guess. So this section is a little bit more about customers and growth. We'll see whether how good, it might not be that relevant, but you mentioned that you've got 8,000 Instagram followers, right? So are you actively pursuing, what is your channel for getting more agents in to try out Cast now?
So one thing I realized as I was building Cast is you don't have to wait for the product to be built before you build some sort of a brand, right? Which is something I'd never thought about, because you're working in a large company, you're focused on developing the product. You don't have to think about like selling. The sales team is going to take care of it. But what I realized in Cast is you can create a brand even if you don't have any product at all. In fact, on my business Instagram, I haven't started selling yet.
Mm,
Right. I just started putting out content that I hoped and researched afterwards that real estate agents would find interesting, helpful, entertaining at times, right? Being able to speak the same language as them, right?
I see.
So,
Yeah.
so I think for me that was a big revelation in some ways.
Mm,
Now my focus, as I've mentioned, is going to be on getting the product off the shelf, which is how do I shift towards monetizing that channel, right? So it's easier said than done. Of course, so far the followers I think don't look at Cast as sort of this innovative AI product. They look at it as a brand who's put out content which they find helpful. They share it, they save it, tips, techniques, how to be a better agent, for example. But now we want to shift that to, okay, well, we've got a product for you now, right? Come and test it out. So that's going to be one of my primary channels for next year. I don't know how many we can convert, but also I don't want to use it just to sell, sell, sell. I wanted to, again, focus on sharing what it can do for them. So being still focused on that outcome that it can bring them instead of selling features. Now I have to shift my own mindset a little bit, right? Coming
mm,
from product background, you're sometimes naturally inclined towards like just talking about the product features. So I have to take a little bit step back from like overwhelming them potentially with the product capabilities and more focused on getting them to the next stage in the funnel, which is just making them understand, hey, we're developing something. We've developed something that you're going to find cool, helpful.
Mhm.
Come use it, become an early adopter, and then we'll worry about like moving them to the bottom of the funnel and maybe upselling at some point. So that's going to be my number one goal. And then number two is building partnerships with people in the industry who've got that voice already. I come from a product and tech background. I don't come from a real estate background as such. So I feel like that part is maybe missing in the equation. So I'm currently focused on some active partnership building with a couple of folks who are that voice in the industry that real estate agents already look up to. They listen to them, and so if I can sell them the vision, right, or if they come on board in some capacity, I think that obviously helps with the scaling quite quickly.
This is the Gen AI moment, So 2022, roll back our clocks, November 2022, ChatGPT launches, right? So, and it's changed, like what you said earlier on. AI has changed already, if not, or it's going to change for sure. What teams can do, right? So Gen AI has changed what small teams can build, right? A six-person team can punch like they are 50 people now,
Yep.
and you don't need a lot of capital from that standpoint, right? How has Gen AI changed things for you in the company? I know you mentioned a little bit about the agents having in that trifactor, they're worried about Gen AI. Have you seen any positive things that it can do for agents? So can you talk a little bit about the Gen AI and both for Cast and the market?
Yeah. So Cast internally, as I mentioned earlier, we can develop faster, we can test faster, we can strategize quicker. I mean, I've thought of ideas that working with ChatGPT. ChatGPT is obviously my best friend. Like I'm sure it's yours
Yeah.
as well, or
Yeah.
whatever model of choice you have, right? So, but strategizing, developing, and testing, it's just like crazy the things that are already possible and for me to now even starting to think about like actually building some features myself, or at least going 0 to 1 and then the team can take it from 1 to 10, is already massive, and we're not even fully utilizing it yet, right? So we're embracing it, but we could certainly be doing a lot more already. So but I love where we're going, slow and steady. On the other hand, from an agent's point of view, so this is a journey that I've mapped out. It's not going to be as a flip of the switch, right? You're not going to go from not using AI to being an amazing AI business overnight. So there's a journey. So I've mapped it out. I actually spoke at a summit, Hofstra University, where I first introduced the idea of like taking the agents and the companies through a journey of AI adoption, right? From an explorer all the way to sort of visionary, right?
Mm,
Explorer meaning you're using ChatGPT maybe to write listing descriptions, right? Writing the description of the home that you're selling, right? And then the visionary could be curating very personalized, very local experiences for their clients, but also potential leads, right? So from an agent's perspective, they're already using it, for social media posts and content, etc. But they're really in the first phase or two, right?
mm.
I can build Cast in such a way that we take people and now companies, brokerages from the first where they're just exploring another tool to like truly getting to an analyst, automator, and then eventually visionary.
Mm.
So that's the goal. That's the vision. That's the hope. Um, and I think once they get there, they provide much better experiences to their clients.
It's a good way of putting it, those three stages. So continuing on that, you kind of touched upon it. So what do you think is going to be the AI-enabled brokerage looking at, let's say, 5 years, 3 to 5 years down? What does it look like for, especially from a real estate brokerage standpoint that you can see?
So number one, I very thoroughly believe at this point, and I better believe it because I'm building for agents and brokerages, that the world is not going to be agentless.
Mm,
We are going to have real estate agents, whether we believe it right now or not. We
mm,
are going to have, they play multiple roles: negotiator, marketer, therapist at times. They're not going to go away. So, number one, I'm going to talk about the more successful. Some brokerages, I think, will shut down, right?
mm.
Maybe they fail to adapt. Maybe they fail to listen to what's happening, right? But I think the smarter brokerages, the more successful ones, will have enabled their agents to not just sell more, but also sense more.
Mm.
And this is where I feel like AI will play a huge role, because now you can anticipate the needs of the people you're trying to serve, right? You can anticipate you can predict the leads, and you can anticipate what they want. So long story short, I think the successful AI enabled brokerages will have gotten to a stage where they're curating better client experiences. They're helping clients buy and sell, yes, but they're not looked at as just intermediaries for buying and selling. They're looked at as like a guide, a trusted advisor, and somebody who's going to help them through this journey of the biggest decision maybe of their lives.
This has been amazing. I mean, I really love the passion and how articulate you are about the problem. I'm fascinated by different things that you've said. Can you tell us a little bit about where people can find more about Cast, and if there are agents that are listening, what is the best way to, let's say, sign up for a free trial, or what is the best way for them to start adopting Cast?
The easiest way for anybody that's listening who might be in the space is to simply go to our website, Kast.biz. That is also our Instagram handle. That is the best way to connect with us, with me directly. Um, and and thank you again for hosting, for taking the time. Um, I also love the fact that you shared your own experiences. It truly felt
Yeah,
like a conversation. At some point, I'd love to know a little bit more about your company, but maybe we'll leave that for
yeah.
another day, another meeting, another podcast. But thank you for spending this time with me. And like I said, as an early stage startup founder, I want to do everything I can to get the word out. So this helps. I appreciate the line of questioning, but also, like I said, sharing your own experiences along the way.
Perfect. Thanks, Vipin. So one last selfish question, for not
Yes,
for
please.
me, but for founders, and then with that we'll sign off. Okay. So what is the one advice that you can give to any aspiring founder, both in digital products, maybe in prop tech as well? I know that your the whole podcast is filled with some of the nuggets from market research to bootstrapping, a bunch of other things. But what is the one advice you would give, Vipin?
I'll give you two, but I feel like they're kind of connected, right? So first is like figure out the why. Why are you doing this, right? And that's a personal question. But there's also the why of the product. Why does a product exist, right? So I think founders have to answer those questions before they are successful. And without those, I feel like it's hard. So once you figure those out, I think the rest is, yes, luck's going to play a role, but most founders come with that inner hustle and grind. But I think if you don't have those two whys aligned, you're just going to run around, and at some point you're going to burn out and be unsuccessful. So that's my one advice.
Perfect, perfect. I think that's super important, especially knowing what problem you're solving before and jumping to the solution. That is one thing I've seen with some people. Hey, I want to do this way, but like, what is the problem, right? So, anyway, with that, I think we've come to the end of this podcast. Thanks for listening to the podcast, everyone. Look forward to seeing you the next time. And that was Vipin for you. Okay. And look forward to more updates, and, follow his website and other stuff on how Cast is doing. Okay. See you then, guys. Bye.
Thanks a lot.